So hey everybody, this is J.R. Cook from BlizzPro.com, and I'm here with another interview. This time I'm with the Hearthstone team. Dean Ayala, did I pronounce that right?
That was right. That's basically correct.
Balance designer.
Close.
And Ben Thompson, art director. We're here to talk about League of Explorers, Hearthstone Adventure. So, first thing I want to jump into here is the past adventure modes were, kind of focused around raids. Focused around, you had Naxxramas, you had Blackrock Mountain, and this one is actually focusing on actual adventure.
Yeah.
So, why did you decide to go ahead with this concept instead of, maybe going with another raid like Karazhan or Icebound Citadel or something like that?
This is a really important step for Hearthstone as a game and the team as a whole. We're all really excited about this because it marks the first step in hopefully a number of steps to come that are a slight break with the World of Warcraft general canon of story. We see ourselves as running parallel, really, with World of Warcraft and telling stories that they haven't told and us building on stories that they themselves are now starting to tell with things like Legion and whatnot. When it comes to Hearthstone, we've always felt that it has very strong legs of its own, and this is an example of we can build on some of that existing. You look at Brand Bronzebeard and the fact that there is a League of Explorers in the World of Warcraft. And we will be going to Uldaman and all these places that are known, if only in name, but we're going to be doing it with 3 new heroes or 3 new adventurers. We look at Reno Jackson, we look at the Starseeker and her group of maps and abilities to find us anywhere, and Sir Finley Mergleton, all rounding out for the 4. And then you, as the player, become the official 5th member of the party, and that felt like a really nice feeling and kind of a return to our childhood love of adventure and discovery.
So, how about Harrison Jones? I mean, I was fully expecting to see him.
Harrison Jones is kind of a loner. He likes to do his own thing. He's been presented with opportunities before to work with people, and he more or less does that from time to time. But he's also busy in World of Warcraft, helping a lot of those intrepid explorers of their own on their own versions of those trips.
So tell me a little bit about, you're saying we've got the Temple of Orsis, Uldaman, Ruined City. There's another wing up there that I can't see right now, but no, that's fine. But we were talking a little bit right before this interview about the Staff of Origination.
Yes.
And I was wondering if you can explain a little bit of how that's going to work in the adventure.
Staff is a mysterious artifact. The origins of it, unknown. But at some point in its vast history, it was broken into 3 pieces and scattered to the 4 corners of Azeroth. I don't know how you scatter 3 pieces to 4 corners, but they did it. And during the course of this adventure, you will join these explorers as they go out to find the 3 pieces. Now that at least Starseeker has located them, it's now up to you to help the League rejoin the pieces into the ultimate Staff of Power.
Okay, so it seems that you guys are kind of on the schedule of, it seems like you're releasing new content about every 3 to 4 months. We've been seeing kind of expansion, adventure mode, expansion, adventure mode. Is this intentional? Is this something that we're going to continue seeing forward, or does it just happen to be falling this way?
We'll continue to do adventures or expansions when they make sense. It's really about how many cards are we releasing. We don't really want to overwhelm people. Releasing an expansion, what that generally means to us is over 100 cards, and it's hard for us to do that because we want to interject content every so often so things can stay fresh. But a lot of times that means we have to introduce a lot of cards, and expansions generally mean a lot. So I think that we'll just continue to do whatever we think really makes sense. We don't have a set schedule. I would not expect for the future of Hearthstone forever for it to be expansion, adventure, expansion. But it's worked for us to this point. And when we were talking about what to do previous to this, expansion was that's something that's on the table at any time. But we felt like adventure was the right way to go this time, and next time we'll just continue to do what makes sense.
All right. So moving forward beyond this, we know Ben Brode has said many times, additional deck slots are coming. What other features and interface improvements might be coming in the pipeline that you guys are possibly thinking about that we might be seeing in the future?
It's certainly an interesting point considering how much of the UI we'll have to see undergo an adjustment for things like new formats. When it went from computer to tablet and then from tablet to phone, for sure, we underwent a huge upheaval of the UI, and everything had to basically be rejiggered and adjusted so that it made sense and was still readable, understandable, and then most importantly, still felt like Hearthstone. Still felt like the game that people had come to know and love on a desktop to a tablet to a mobile device or like an iPhone or Android. And that same thing is going to happen anytime we end up going in and playing with the UI for whatever reasons that may be. It's currently what we're experiencing as we look at things like deck slots and other things and where those fit in. You always have to keep in mind we have to adjust for 3 or more platforms. It's never just one. And with that comes a bit of a tax. You have to really, we work very closely with the UI designers and artists, Derek Sakamoto and Max Ma, as they try to solve these problems and in such a way that isn't just good enough, because it's quote easy to just add things, but it's very difficult to do it in such a way that feels right, keeps it simple and keeps it very readable and understandable, and is likely being done in a way that people don't necessarily expect, but they find is the best way to do it.
So speaking of being on the mobile platform, that obviously affects your design decisions. Do you feel that that's kind of restrictive to the future of the design for Hearthstone, or do you feel that it just makes you work more creatively to try to fit these things in? Are you finding that things might be left out because of that, or are you trying to find ways to be able to make it happen?
I think you're exactly right when you say it forces us to be more creative. The good thing about something like a phone interface is that's about as small as you get, right, in terms of what space is there and what we have to do to a board so that you have a place for your hand to go, what we have to do to a mana tray so that you've got places to display that. And really at this point, whenever we're instituting a new facet to the game, a new Tavern Brawl that's going to require a certain set of things, or whatever that may be, or some story element within an adventure that will require certain movements across the board or whatever, it has to be taken into consideration from a phone perspective, first and foremost. In a way, it's nice because it forces us to make the most simple choice all the time. But what's simple for phone may not be the same for your tablets, and certainly for your desktop situation, Mac or PC. It's always going to be just slightly different or off from one another, but certainly we now have the benefit of releasing simultaneously on all these platforms, so rather than solving it up front in one place and then having to resolve it twice more when we go to tablet and phone, we're doing it all at once. So we definitely look to the most simplistic of the advancement of that UI to inform the rest.
Right. So there's a lot of interesting cards coming up. In fact, you guys have revealed them all already on what's coming out in League of Explorers. And this question might be for you, Dean. How do you think these cards, or want these cards, to be able to impact the competitive meta?
It's really about just creating new decks. At the end of a cycle, usually, the decks start to look more and more the same because people have really figured out the meta, or at least they think that they figured out the meta. And when you interject new cards, you want to interject new decks. So when you're creating new cards, you want to create stuff that's going to make people think, not necessarily how can I put this card into a deck that already exists to make it better, but more so, how can I look at this card and make me think of just a new deck that has never existed before. And I think we tried really hard to do that. A couple examples, I would say Reno Jackson is a card that it's gonna spawn decks that you've never seen before, basically. That's the card that it heals you to full if you don't have more than one copy of the same card in your deck at that point. And that's a really, really powerful text box. So I think a lot of people are going to try to figure out how to make that best. And it's really exciting to me just because that deck doesn't exist. And I mean, what class is it best in? I have my own ideas from testing that we've done, but I think people are going to figure out really crazy stuff with that.
Yeah, one of the things that we're seeing in the current meta, of course, is you're seeing a lot of cards. It seems like Naxxramas was a very powerful set. It seems like Goblins versus Gnomes was a very powerful set. The Grand Tournament, you're not seeing a lot of cards. Of course, you're seeing Secret Paladin that kind of showed up because of that set. When you design a card, you got Piloted Treader up here. That's probably one of the best 4-drops in the game. We got Dr. Boom up here, which is probably the best 7-drop in the game. When you're designing these cards, how do you think about those cards and possibly, okay, is this going to be able to compete with that card? Might we see less Paladin Shredder? Might we see Dr. Boom? Or are these cards going to replace them completely? I mean, do you think about those old cards like that?
Of course. It's certainly a balance, because with cards like Paladin Shredder that are in the neutral pool, that was really a conscious decision on our part. It was like, what is Gnomes versus Goblins all about? It's about mechs and crazy stuff happening, and Paladin Shredder really like spoke to what Goblin versus Gnomes was. So when we looked at that card, it was kind of okay for us to like push the power level a little bit on that card. It's like, what's the downside if everyone is playing X card is usually the question. And if the downside is it's like a card that, you know, charges and does 30 damage, and that's not really a card that you want like to take a risk on. And with Paladin Shredder, it was a card that really kind of showcased what GVG was about. So that was kind of why we made that decision. And but it is dangerous, kind of like you say, because you don't want all the games to for every single deck to, oh, it's turn 4, it's the turn that you play Paladin Shredder. So that's not necessarily like our goal. I think going forward, you'll start to see less of the super high power level all the time cards in the neutral pool. Like, you'll still see very powerful cards, but they'll be very powerful in this deck, in that deck, but not, you know, in this deck over here. So I think that's more of the direction we want to go. I'm still happy with Paladin Shredder and stuff like Sludge Belcher and Zombie Chow. Those cards really accomplished what they set out to accomplish. Like Zombie Chow and Paladin Shredder, or Zombie Chow and Sludge Belcher rather. The meta was getting really fast at the time, so we wanted to slow it down a little bit and, you know, change things up. And those cards really accomplished that for us. And of course, as you release more and more cards, just by virtue of there being more cards in the pool, like when Next Ramus came out, there was far less cards. So it's a lot easier for those cards to make a bigger impact because it's making an impact on a smaller pool of cards. And the more cards that are introduced, you have more options already, so it becomes a little bit more difficult.
Right, but like I said, we're still seeing those cards today even, but for Paladin Shredder, for example, though, it's more of a card that, you know, you got this huge pool of where it can pull from. Do you feel that as time goes on, there's more and more 2-drops that Paladin Shredder will always be good, or will eventually kind of fall off to the wayside?
It really depends on the cards that we introduce going forward. Because I mean, if we introduce a card that is, you know, really, really great in this specific type of deck, like, there are other cards that are better than Paladin Shredder in some circumstances, in some decks. And I think if we continue to make cards that are, it's like, oh, this is really good in, you know, like a mill deck, or a ramp deck, or a really, really aggressive deck, and we have like those options, I think people will, you know, choose those cards over Paladin Shredder. As long as we're like, keep continuing to give more and more options.
And one of the things that has kind of hit the community more recently is we're seeing a lot of pro players kind of talking about the game and how it's kind of playing out in a certain way. Like, if you are able to play on curve, you almost always win, because you always, you know, for Druid, for example, I play a lot of Druid right now, especially aggro Druid. So, you know, I might have turn 3, Shade and Next Ramus. Turn 4 is always going to be my Paladin Shredder. Turn 5, if I didn't get it out earlier, it's going to be my Fel Reaver or Druid of the Claw.
That is a
right,
for sure.
Right, and then, you know, that's just going to lead me to win. And, you know, if the other player didn't get their curve set out, they didn't... Is there any way that when you're designing cards or designing around the game to be able to allow players to be able to come back from someone who might have the perfect curve, or is that just going to be part of the game?
I actually just don't think that is really the case. Like in the circumstance of Ramp Druid, that is really what that deck tries to do. They try to play minions on curve. They try to include like enough options and, you know, build their deck in a way where it is likely to build curve out. And I think like Dragon Priest kind of plays the same way. But you have decks like Handlock that are really, really popular. You have decks like Freeze Mage that are really, really popular, and they play a totally different game. They don't play the on-curve minion drop after drop after drop. They want to draw their entire deck and kind of get to their like sort of combo piece so they can, you know, finish the game in their own way. So I think there are different types. There are decks that want to curve out. There's plenty that, you know, don't necessarily want to do that.
Yeah. So this week in Tavern Brawls, we got to see our first co-op play. And I was curious, what's been the response that you've gotten so far with this week's Tavern Brawl? And is this something that you're looking to incorporate more? Because I know from a personal standpoint, I've actually had people that have added me, and for the first time in my life in Hearthstone, has actually put up a good conversation that didn't involve call me bad names. So I was wondering if you guys have gotten a lot of response back from that, and what it is, and if you're going to use that going forward.
This has been a very positive Tavern Brawl in more ways than one. The response, as you allude to, has been very great. It's very strong, and both internal and external. It's one that even when we were testing internally, it was like, wow, this feels super fun. This just has a sense of gameplay that's surprising and interesting, and really executed on every level of what we want from Tavern Brawls. Something new, something fun. Let's throw out the rules for a little bit. The community response has been equally as strong, and as such, who knows? I could definitely see it being a Tavern Brawl that may one day be repeated. It just depends. But certainly, I like the other positive aspect of that, of watching the community, certainly on day one, realize what this meant, and them look at their cards and have to think about, wow, I'm not hurting the other guy or gal, I need to help them now, and ooh, that's going to mean I can do this. And just watching people recognize that, watching people find ways by hook or crook to communicate with each other through the emote system has been intriguing, where they build out this kind of series of almost code for like the way they say something. And I've seen people write up stuff about like how, saying this at this point, and the other person picked up on it. It's like, oh, okay, you can help me on the next turn if I do this or whatever. It's been really, really fascinating. And as you say, a lot of interesting relationships have happened through chat and otherwise as a result. We're extremely hopeful that we get to continue doing these kind of interesting and challenging moments in Hearthstone. Whether it will show up in regular play, I think remains to be seen. I think it would have to make sense. I think it would have to make sense for the mode, the adventure, the expansion, whatever that would be. And then, as you pointed out rightly, user interface, if it were to end up being a mode of its own. But there's no real plans for that in the future.
So, one of the common questions that we get a lot of, and every time that you guys are about to make an announcement, and people speculate, oh, they're going to release a new hero. It's going to be a Death Knight. It's going to be a monk. It's going to be, something like that. And I keep telling people that I personally don't think we'll ever see a new hero in the game, just because of the balance that needs to be done. You need to bring in all of, new cards. The longer that you wait, the more cards that you have to release. And I was wondering if you guys believe that as well, because I know that you're not currently, well, it might surprise me, maybe you are working on new heroes, but I don't believe that you are. I was wondering mostly how you guys think about adding new heroes into the game, and if it's ever going to happen in Hearthstone, or if it's going to happen anytime soon.
I think you're certainly correct in the sense that 9 heroes is a lot of heroes. It's a lot of classes to really manage and keep the meta alive in, and still people having fun and interesting deck engagements between those. You're also exactly right. If 45 cards from an adventure really throw upheaval into a meta, and 150 or more in an expansion can do the same on a much greater scale, it boggles the mind to think of what a new class or a new hero would do to that same meta. You're right. You would have to assess every card in the game. You'd have to assess how these classes relate to each other. And it can't be understated the kind of effect that would have on the Hearthstone game as a whole. We're really happy with the 9 classes that are in there, and there are no plans at this point to add a new one.
And speaking of that, though, not too long ago, you guys introduced these new skins that you can change your hero.
Absolutely.
I was actually expecting this weekend to hear more about adding more. Are there more plans on introducing more heroes into the game as alternate skins, and are we going to be seeing that in the near future and some more?
We're very excited about new heroes. We think it's an awesome way to build more personality into all these established classes. The idea of it changing genders, the idea of it allowing you to play new favorite heroes from World of Warcraft that may not have been there if Malfurion's not so much your guy. Maybe there's one in the future that would fit that. Certainly, if you're a Jaina player but you really like Medivh more, you have options available to you. Because that it's exciting to us, it's not something that we've taken off the table, and we're certainly looking for whatever makes sense for those in the future. At this point, we don't have anything to announce or talk about right now.
So we've gotten a lot of improvement recently with a new mode for constructed. With Tavern Brawls, we've gotten new ladder improvements, rewards, and things like that. When are we going to start seeing some love for Arena?
Well, I think just introducing new cards to the format really changes, the way Arena players play. I think people have been seeing a lot of Mage and a lot of Paladin for a really long time, and I think that really is more of like our focus. Is like how do we make it so the other classes, they can put up more of a standing, like a fighting chance, basically. And we addressed that a little bit in League of Explorers, where we introduced some like pretty high power level common warrior cards. I would say more so than the rest of the classes, and I think warrior kind of needed the most help. So I think definitely the first step with Arena in terms of giving some love to Arena is creating that varied experience that I'm talking about, like giving warriors and putting them on the same level with those other classes. So I think that if once we can start to deliver on that, and you're getting a better experience that way, then we can talk about maybe doing more for Arena. But that's really our focus right now.
All right, so I got one more question for you guys. With the new cards that are coming with League, you might know this a little bit more. Do you have any predictions on where the meta is going to go right now? We're seeing Secret Paladin, Aggro Druid, Mid-Range Druid, a little bit of Control Warrior, a little bit of Freeze Mage up top. Do you have any predictions on where some unexpected deck that we're going to see?
A couple predictions. Well, I have two. The first one is whatever the Reno deck is. I think people are going to experiment a lot with Reno Jackson. A card that heals you to full completely. That's insanely powerful in the text box. That can basically just bring you back from any aggro matchup. And I think Secret Paladin is one of those. Aggro Hunter is still very popular. So like just having that available in your deck, if you can kind of make the downside of Reno really not that bad, and I don't know what class exactly that is yet, but I think that's going to turn out to be really popular. And also Unearthed Raptor is it's going to be like the new Death Rattle Rogue deck. We've been experimenting a lot with that, and it's been very good. And when you're playtesting a deck like that, it's actually like somewhat difficult because there's nothing to really pull from. Before, that deck didn't really exist. So if it's good in playtesting for us, when the deck we don't have anything to pull from, I think that's going to be sort of a new way to play. Rogues sort of play like right now very similar. Like they've been playing in basically the same way for a very long time. So introducing a new deck type to that class, I think, is really, really cool. And so I would say whatever the Reno Jackson deck is and the new Rogue deck is what I'm going to be excited to see.
Yeah, and I feel that Rogue has been, very underplayed in Constructed. Is probably, unless you play Oil, it doesn't really seem that you have anything up there. So We're really excited to see, maybe Rogue starting to make some kind of a comeback. So.
Yeah, look at the World Championships today.
Yeah.
Look what they did there. I'm looking for some interesting Rogue play following the championships this evening.
Right. So awesome. Well, it was good to talk to you guys.
Awesome.
You as well, sir.
I'm excited for the new adventure mode, and
can't wait for you to play it.
I'm gonna get home, and by the time I'm home, it should be out. So I'm excited for that.
There you go.
Oh, nice to meet you.
Thanks again.
Thank you very much, sir.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah.